Hello, and welcome to this session on how to help others defeat their barriers to Jesus. So this video is being recorded as a bonus session to our event, How to Defeating Your Barriers to Jesus, and is based on questions that were submitted to us during the event. If I haven't met you before, or you haven't seen me before, my name is Christy Harang. I'm on the team of Thrive Today, and in a minute, I'm going to be joined by our president and co-founder Chris Coursey, who's going to be answering the questions that came in. And so our discussion is largely geared toward those who are volunteering or working, helping others like counselors and pastors. But we also really believe that what Chris is going to be sharing today would be helpful for anyone that's watching. So we really hope that you enjoy what he has to share today. For those of you who did not register for the event, Defeating Your Barriers to Jesus, this session is somewhat a standalone session, so you're still going to get something out of this even if you didn't attend the event. However, if you're interested and want to learn more about the event, I will be sharing a little bit more about that at the end of our time together. So with that, Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Christy. This is a fun topic, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, this is great. And it's always fun when we get to have conversations based on the questions that come in. These are really thoughtful questions and excellent ones. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in response. So I want to start off by, in our event, you talked about relational circuits. So this is our ability to actually be in a relational place, and how this is foundational to being able to connect with Jesus or sense the nearness of God. So the question that came in is tied to that point. And they ask, can you give an example of what you might notice when someone thinks that their relational circuits are on, and then you go into prayer and they seem to need some more work to connect better? And so they're really looking for two things. What indicators would help you see that this is happening? So that's number one. And number two, what would be an example of gracefully pivoting in moments like these?
Yeah, what a great question. And, it helps to approach this with just a very gentle reminder for all the helpers out there that this implies that we keep our relational circuits on as helpers, right? Because if my relational circuits are dimmed, or I'm slipping into what Jim Wilder calls enemy mode, then what happens is I don't notice those subtleties. So that's what I want to kind of flesh out briefly today, is just what are some of those subtleties, and maybe it's not so subtle as well, where people are just losing access to their relational circuits. So as helpers, we're working hard to keep our relational oxygen mask on as we work with people and enter into what they're navigating. So people as you've gotten to work with them, so you probably have a sense as to, when are they still relational? When are they losing their peace? When are they slipping into enemy mode? But there are a few essentials that I watch for. One would just be, can they shift their attention in a moment from focusing on what's upsetting to pausing and being able to tap into appreciation, or even what we call interactive memories with the Lord, where I've had these special moments back here in my history where I felt God's closeness and God's peace. So I'm just noticing and watching for, where's their attention? And are we able to have the painful, bothersome thought here, but also pause? We take a breath and we say, okay, well, let's go back to that appreciation moment that we were talking about earlier, or that interactive God moment. So I'm just monitoring that. If they can't access some of the joy and the peace, and that tells me they're really locked into enemy mode, and it's going to be hard. So I would just help them get relational at that point. But I'm also, observing for curiosity. That's a big one. Are they curious about what God's thinking and doing, where God is in this? Is it curious and desperate? It's shades of colors, right? Because I might be curious over here, but without answers, it becomes a little more intense and I start feeling this angst. So can they still feel some curiosity, or is it like I'm locked on here like a heat-seeking missile and I'm focused on what's bothering me? I'm not curious. Then I would say, okay, this might be time for us to just pause and catch our breath Are they flexible? Are they open and receptive to God's input? I'm watching for, are they rigid? Right? Because at least when my relational circuit is still hanging on there, I like that Carl Lehman calls it a dimmer switch. So there's shades here. I am looking for, is there just a receptivity to God's nudges and just God's voice and God's leading? Are we flexible here? Or is it like, sometimes I see people, they're like white knuckling the process and they're forcing it and they can't take another breath without trying to find what they're looking for. And it's not going to work well. We need to pause, put the car in park, and let's get relational for a moment. So I'm monitoring that, and honestly just watching their body. I'm monitoring their breathing. Are we breathing deeply and shallow? Because when you're sitting across from people, it's not hard to, because your brain will mirror what people are doing. So I'm monitoring my breathing as well. And I'm noticing, how are we breathing here? And are they like holding their breath? Are they breathing shallow? And I often will invite friends when I see that to say, hey, I know, it seems like you're getting tense. You're holding your breath. Let's take a moment. Let's pause. Let's get relational. So I'm monitoring their body, their voice, their demeanor. How are they doing here? Putting a lot of weight on those nonverbal cues that all tell a story. And I'm also looking for, if they're trying to connect with Jesus, can they feel some appreciation? Can they pause and catch their breath? Can they access some of these God memories over here? Can they notice interaction with Jesus right now? And again, I don't force it as a good rule of thumb. We just would pause and get relational. So if I see that they're struggling, then I would just, in my personal style, would say, hey, you know what? I think we're forcing it here. Why don't we pause, catch our breath? Let's do some breathing. Let's do some quieting. Let's do whatever it takes to get relational. And again, if I know them, I would know some of those go-to responses. So how the helper might approach it really comes down to their personal style. But mine is usually with an invitation. How about can we take a moment and catch our breath and practice appreciation and do these things? So as the helper, you're monitoring these things. As you monitor yourself, you're monitoring the person that you're serving. You're staying relational. And in a sense, if they're doing a lot of splashing and they're doing a lot of taking in water, then we got to help them get back into their relational boat. And Christy, that's really what we're after here. Just finding a language and finding a way to help people get back in the boat when they're kind of relationally flailing in some way, shape, or form.
No, that's great. And would you say for the helper, because you said, hey, if you know them, you might know what works, but maybe they're new at figuring this out and what works. So there's permission to troubleshoot, like, okay, well, let's try appreciation. Let's try doing some breathing together. Let's try a few different things. And then, like you said, if it doesn't work, hey, it's okay. Then you just try something else. And then they can, through trial and error, discover what tends to bring them back into a relational place the best.
That's right. And I like that discover word, because really, one of the common resistance factors for people, for helpers, is they're afraid they're going to be wrong, or they're afraid they're wrong, or they're not seeing it correctly. And I have a good rule of thumb. Throw the flag anytime you think somebody's just losing their relational footing. Just go ahead. That you can't go wrong with a pause, with the breather, with, getting relational and just checking in. Hey, how are you doing? It looks like we might be getting, slipping here and sliding. Let's just, are we still relational? And all of this implies that we've talked about relational circuits, and we've talked about what happens when we're in enemy mode, and just, and nothing good grows from enemy mode. So as a good rule of thumb, we just create the atmosphere where we can talk about these things.
Awesome. All right. Well, Chris, another issue you addressed in the event was quieting, and how quieting can be an incredibly helpful tool for us when we are wanting to find some connection with Jesus. And you did a whole session on this. But you also mentioned that sometimes when we try to quiet ourselves, that's when pain starts talking to us, when we get quiet enough to start hearing it. And so this is tied to that point. So what can I do when someone else always goes through a pattern like, Why did God allow my son to commit suicide or my daughter to be raped or something like that? Why did God allow this to happen whenever that they quiet? So they can't seem to get through quieting without being triggered. It can even be, why did my air conditioner break?
Mhm. Yeah, you know what? That's such an important question, Christy, because really this comes, how that goes, how we respond sets the tone for what happens next. And as a rule of thumb, I try not to speak for God. And so when I hear somebody saying that I've learned this the hard way over the years, but I find that God's answers are much better than my answers. So when you're trying to quiet and some of these thoughts come in, those thoughts are there for a good reason. Right. And so basically, this is the brain's way of saying, I'm not sure I'm going to let my guard down because I've got, there's something here. I've got a problem. So I always validate what I hear. I've listened for emotions, as Marcus Warner and I say in some of our 4 Habits books. So we listen for what the person is feeling. We validate. So I would say, wow, I can imagine this would be hard to quiet because of what you just shared. And I would invite them, what helps when you feel this way? What helps? What do you need? And ultimately, my goal is to get them to the point where they would be willing to interact with God out loud about this thing. So I might say, hey, Jesus is sitting here with us anyway. Why don't you tell him? Why don't you ask him? And so quieting's difficult because your brain has this pain. It just, we don't know what to do with it, right? It's big and it's loud and it's just awful. So let's engage the living God. Let's just talk to him about it. Hey, here's what's going on. So this is a good sign that, this is where our life model, Thrive model comes in really helpful to understand their brain is at what we call level 2, which is a survival circuit response. So when these feelings and reactions come up, my brain's survival circuit is saying, hey, wait a minute, I got a problem here. And so at level 2, I'm not able to share the feeling quite yet. And it makes it hard to quiet because my brain is like on guard, right? So what happens there is people need to be able to access some of the quieting. So we validate, we say what we see, which says, I'm here with you. I see you and I hear you, and I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Now I feel less alone, right? So now the person feels less alone. I feel like you're in this with me at some level. I can breathe easier because you are here. And so then once they start feeling seen, heard, and understood, they're not alone. So it starts feeling a little safer to be able to quiet. And so we can start inviting them to practice some quieting or some pausing. And again, when I say like quieting, it can be like a matter of seconds. Doesn't have to be minutes. It's definitely not hours. So I might say, hey, you know what? Let's practice for 30 seconds. I'm going to set a timer and I will put the timer right in front so they know my alarm's going to go off in 30 seconds so they can see it. It's just we're going to practice a little bit. So it's about quality here, not quantity. And so I'm going to do it with you. So let's do this together. Let's take some deep breaths. Would you like to get comfortable? Would you like to lay on the couch or sit? Like, what do you need to feel comfortable here? And so we're sharing feelings. We're validating. This creates safety to start quieting. Often people just jump into let's quiet. Like, okay, well, those thoughts, let's just put them aside for a moment and try to quiet. Oh, it ain't going to work. You're going to play tug of war. So we validate. We might even need to engage God on this and just share, these thoughts. And we might, that might lead to a short little Emmanuel moment where we connect with God. Or it just, sometimes we just need to get some of that out in order to access the quieting skills. So just sharing that with people, creating safety and connection will go a long way. Then we find creative ways. At Thrive, we have 2 kinds of quieting. We have just simple quieting, which is practicing peace. And then we have interactive quieting, which is we share big feelings and then we quiet. And we share big feelings and then we quiet. And so sometimes the helpers have to do that when there's those kinds of reactions. But basically you're creating safety for people to feel what they need to feel, to know they're not alone. And the natural response of that and the byproduct of this process is you're ready for rest. You're ready for quieting. In fact, And it's kind of like Jesus touching the demoniac and healed the guy, and the guy's sitting in his right mind, clothed at Jesus's feet. So in a sense, get through the intense stuff. What's around the corner is quiet, calm, peace, comfort, and rest. And that's what we're after.
Wonderful. And I like how you stressed in the beginning that you don't try to answer the question for them. And I just want to say, if you can get to the point where they can hear Jesus, one thing I've been so encouraged at is I remember one time praying with this girl years ago, and she had this really hard question. And I'm like, well, let's ask God about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's he going to say?
Yeah.
How is there an answer to this really hard question?
Mm.
And he had the most beautiful answer for her. So I've just seen that. I'm sure you've seen it over and over again, these questions where you think there can't be a good answer to this question. God always knows exactly what they need to hear. So if you can get them to the place where they can ask Jesus, then
that's right.
Really
that's
amazing.
That's the gold.
But,
that's right.
Yeah, like you said, much better than anything we would have to offer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So you also, let's see. You shared as a way to quiet in the event, the Shalom My Body exercises. And I'm going to put in the description of this video, we'll put a link to the Shalom My Body exercises so you can see a video demonstration of them. But one participant asked, I've been working with women who have not found the Shalom Your Body exercises enough to calm them and give them a sense of safety if they've been in freeze or overwhelm for a while. Are there any other exercises I can recommend to help them feel safe and calm?
Yeah, that's an important question, is creating safety. I always tell people the survival circuit's easy to turn on and hard to turn off. And so what that means is it comes on when I feel threatened, and it's all about self-preservation. But once that starts turning on, it doesn't want to go off easily. So part of what you're trying to do, if you're trying to help people be able to quiet, be able to get relational, is to shift out of that self-preservation response that I mentioned before, which is that survival circuit. So this is another good example where people are stuck at the survival circuit at level 2, and they're not shifting up to the relational part of the brain, what we call level 3, which is the cingulate cortex. And level 3 is where we can share emotions and share feelings and kind of share reality. But level 2, there's no sharing. It's like I'm just fighting for my life, whether it's the freezing or the fighting or fleeing or fawning or what have you. So what we have to do is get creative and try to help find some very practical ways that we can help them shift out of the survival response, because their brain is still, in a sense, it's in a cramp. And this isn't about making choices. This isn't about willpower. This is just the brain is kind of in a cramp. And, it's not helpful to try to talk to a leg that's in a cramp, because the leg's not going to respond to that. So then what we have to do is start getting creative on what can help people be able to find some other exercises. And some people need to move, right? So some people might need to walk to feel safe, and they need to move, or some people need that interactive quieting that I talked about before, which is you share big feelings and then you try to quiet. We share big feelings, then we quiet. And I invite people to try to have access to their words, try to find words to describe what they're feeling. So I might say, are you able to find words here? Because it looks like you're feeling something really big here. What's going on? And as a rule of thumb, I always pray. I pray for God's peace over people in those places in them that might still be really activated and hurting in some way. In general, a good rule of thumb is sharing stories of returning to joy or staying my relational self when I feel afraid, or even where God's comfort and presence met me when I feel afraid. So when they're not necessarily in the survival response, add stories to the equation. That can be good. Sometimes if they have a third face that's a safe person, that can add a little bit more capacity to them in those moments. So if they have a friend that they might want to invite into the session, that can go a long way. We have a number of exercises in our habit builder courses that really help people to be able to shift. You can almost see this as you're trying to shift like a manual transmission out of level 2 back into level 3, and how well that goes really comes down to, do I feel safe? That's what my level 2 wants. My level 2 needs quieting and needs resting. And what's it going to take to help create the atmosphere where we can rest and quiet? But if I do feel safe and I can catch my breath, then my level 3 will be ready for that shared mind and want to, like, be together here. But as a rule of thumb, with anything with level 2, we always pray for God to bring some healing in those places that might just really feel unsafe, or there might still be some level of unprocessed pain that's going on, that's inflaming. So I do often will just pray for that person, is God, bring your peace into some of these places. But if they are shifting into the survival response, there's always a reason for that. There's always a purpose. So Shalom My Body is not working well enough. Maybe they just need a little more practice because it's not a habit. Maybe they need something a little more intense because level 2 is intense. So sometimes people, even though the Shalom My Body, they choose the one that's a little more like the startle response. Tends to be a good go-to to help people when they're having level 2 problems, because it just kind of gets you going. But I would have that conversation creatively. What else can we do? Maybe it is the movement. Maybe it's different kinds of quieting exercises to help them. But the goal is to get them out of that level 2 into the level 3, where we can share minds and share states and share kind of energy levels. We weep together and we rejoice together. And that's really what we're trying to do here. And sometimes you have to demonstrate for people. Like they say, basically need you to show them, what is it like to try this step? What does it look like? You show me. And so I found that I do a lot of demonstrating sometimes when people are having a hard time shifting gears.
Oh, that's good. I have a question for you on this, Chris, because one of the things that I've been hearing a little bit recently is also a lot of times when we're stuck in level 2, like we're stuck somewhere else, in past trauma, and implicit memory. And so trying to even get in touch with the present moment can kind of help with that, which I think some of the Shalom My Body can help do. So sometimes I, even with myself or like with one of my kids, will try to get them like, what does the carpet feel like under your feet? Touching your body, because to get to a place where your brain knows right now I'm safe.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know if there's any.
Oh yeah. That's, I think, anything involving your senses, anything involving your body. What's good about level 2 is the way out of level 2 is getting to that shared mind place. But your brain is wired, what we call level 4. The captain is also wired to take over when level 2 is just not bringing me good, satisfying solutions. So anything involving the body would be helpful as well, as you're trying to help them shift gears. So you might say, tell me what's happening in your body. Let's go walk in the yard in our bare feet. So ideally, can you remember? And if I can't access the memories, well, let's create it. What is it like to walk barefoot in the carpet? What is it? Let's do some of these things. Feel this pillow. And what does that pillow feel like? Just feel the comfort of that pillow on your face. So getting the senses involved. Sounds, the comforting sounds are good. Voice tones are very important here, because the wrong kind of voice tone can backfire and get people a little more guarded. So you want that soothing, comforting voice. Some people actually like soft singing. And so I'm not much of a singer. That wouldn't work well in my case. But for people who are, they could sing if the person was comfortable with that. And historically, they found that helpful. But have a lot of counselors will have things in their office to help stimulate those senses that provide the touch or the texture to be able to help, anchor me so I feel a little more present and a little more out of my head and into my body, we might say.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, good thoughts.
So this is kind of tied to this theme of trauma. We talked about at the event, you talked about like trauma can be a barrier to being able to connect to Jesus. And so this person is asking, how can you help someone who has a traumatic memory that causes them to feel physically sick at the thought of Jesus, God, or the Holy Spirit?
Yeah, you know what? That's a tough one right there. And there's usually good reasons for that, right? So I find that when that kind of stuff happens, there's a good reason for it. So we don't want to get people to try to choose, make different choices, or just, yeah, willpower their way out. No, there's a reason for it. So what I find is this is where building capacity helps. So how do we get more air in our relational tires? We often say here at Thrive Today. So how can you build capacity? How can you practice the skills, practice exercises, do the things that charge your battery? And so this is where we think about what helps getting relational. What helps you be able to get relational when this happens? So let's work on some ways of just getting our relational circuits on when they're dimming. So I wouldn't force it in the beginning. I wouldn't even try to force it like, let's just push through it. No, let's practice building capacity. Let's get good at getting our relational circuits on. Let's get good at thinking about and sharing the things that bring joy, right? This is where, again, stories are useful. Thinking about things from your day that were good and highlights or examples or reflections on some of the moments from the past. This is where the quieting and the resting come into play. This builds capacity. This is where appreciation and gratitude. So thinking and reflecting on special glad to be together moments, and teasing out what happens in you when you feel these feelings. Tell me about it. If I'm in your shoes, what am I feeling or thinking right now? So what I want to do basically is trying to help them charge their battery and grow capacity so that I can better navigate hard feelings and difficulty. And so I'm not forcing it to just work our way through the quicksand. I'm actually saying, let's just build some muscle first before we try to do that. And as you start building capacity, then we start slowly approaching the topic. And one of the things I would do just as a helper is take authority over any demonic that could be harassing a person, because that sometimes happens, especially with unprocessed pain. So we just acknowledge that you always, as a good rule of thumb, just cover your bases, take authority over any demonic that's inflaming the situation. Ask the Lord by faith to set aside any agreements or vows or anything that might be there from some of the trauma or recalling the trauma. Sometimes this happens because there's just been some agreements in place. Let's just ask the Lord for now, set it aside. We'll deal with it later. And just also ask the Lord if there's anything we can just give him in terms of fears over what may be threatened by going down this road. So I don't force it as a rule of thumb, but it's good to like set up camp around it and build capacity and approach it very slowly. So we're trying to take small steps to generate some momentum for pursuing God's peace. And we start with thinking about gifts and thinking about, times of joy, so that eventually what happens is the Lord tends to show people the source of these good things is actually him. So it might be threatening to feel close to him, but he's the source of all this other stuff. And if he's the source of this other stuff, then maybe there is something good here. But if you cover the basis, I find this becomes fairly manageable, but don't try to plow through it. Just take authority, ask the Lord to set aside, and that's where I might say, can I pray, or can I ask God these things on your behalf? We're not going to touch it for you. That's fine. Can I do these things? So finding some small steps to build momentum, to grow capacity, and start looking at the good stuff so that this will basically become like an oxygen mask as I start to navigate the turbulence over here. But there's always good reasons for it. Even if I don't understand or don't get it, there's a reason for it. And we just have to be patient sometimes and prayerful as we go down that road.
Well, I want to point out in your response is not just what you said, but how you said it. That I think is an important piece of the puzzle is you're not intimidated or stressed out by this. I mean, you acknowledge this is a tough one. And yet there was such a peaceful way you answered. And that made me even think that sometimes when people, if someone's getting physically sick at the thought of Jesus, that could cause panic and just why do I feel such a strong reaction? And I would imagine that as helpers, it could be a bit intimidating. But if the helpers can keep that calm, like, hey, this is okay. We can deal with this.
Yeah,
That's going to even
that's right.
help diffuse the
Yeah,
situation a
you're
bit.
right. Yeah, well said. That's right. We even sometimes how we respond is an example for those that we serve. Yeah, that's a great point, Christy. Great
Yeah.
point.
You're excellent at doing that, Chris.
Oh,
Very
thank
excellent at
you.
keeping calm and
Mm,
peaceful as you minister to people. So,
thank you.
um, so this would be helpful for anyone who's wanting to develop a closeness with Jesus in the context of community. What is the best way to grow our groups, especially men who are willing to be transparent as we grow in our relationship with God? I would like to become better at using these principles and grow our groups.
Yeah, that's wow, that's a good question. And when I hear that question, I think about like how to deepen the reserve of joy and peace in our groups and how to make this joy contagious, right? So like what kinds of things can we do? And I like to just, emphasize here that this is where capacity is really helpful. So capacity gives us strength to navigate hard stuff as well as to find God in some of the difficult places in our lives. So capacity is like this hidden solution that most of us don't realize is even available to a lot of our problems and our challenges and even our pain. So thinking about like group sharing and being vulnerable actually creates more capacity. So when I have a group of people who are with me in the hard stuff as well as in the good stuff, that actually builds capacity. So if you want to grow your group, then one of the things you want to do is see it as you're doing things to grow capacity, because it's in the context of a group, we can handle more. So my problems become more manageable when I share them with the group, opposed to when I'm just holding on to them and not letting people in. So like a group is a gold mine. There's gold in these hills. We just have to like take advantage of this amazing resource of a small group. And so stories are helpful. I find men often are motivated with testimonies and just testimonies of change. So like sharing stories of change and what happens when you've learned a certain skill, what happens when God showed up in some way for you. Being able to share stories as a regular part of what your group does. Like groups are excellent for sharing stories. So share lots and lots of stories and take advantage of having listeners to walk with you through that. Keep in mind, your brain's wired for joy. So when I'm in a group of people that light up to see me, or that we light up when we're together, that intuitively just says something really deep in our brain that says, wow, this is good. I like how I feel when I'm with these people. And we might practice skills in small doses and just invite people to participate. And I find as being in a small group, a lot of the time we just lead by example of what we want people to do. I might share it first. So I have a good rule of thumb when I'm either in a group or if I'm going to hang out with a group, I make it a point of sharing some weaknesses. And like, it just seems to disarm people. So if I'm speaking at an event, one of the first things I do is often share why I shouldn't be the speaker and be disqualified because I have these weaknesses. It's kind of weird, but people go, oh, this is different. So sharing weaknesses actually, normalizes things that might feel intimidating, especially for men, as sometimes we don't wear our heart on a sleeve. We don't like to let people in some way. Just give opportunities and celebrate the sharing of weaknesses as a good thing. And again, if I'm one of the like group leaders or however that works, I'm going to make it a point of sharing weaknesses and then inviting God into the times and reflecting on what's the highlight from our meeting tonight, or just asking the Lord, where were you in this group, or what are you doing as we're here? And just a group is where so many good things grow in that garden. And for people who want to really grow their groups, like just provide opportunities for people to grow. And just keeping in mind, we're wired for this stuff. Our brain craves this stuff. So when you start offering this banquet meal for people at small groups, like it's going to be life-giving. And yeah, just lead by example, add some of these practices into it. and give people opportunities to just notice and reflect on the good stuff and just watch what happens when we start practicing these things.
Awesome. I'm so glad you mentioned leading the way, because I think that's just so huge. Giving people permission to be vulnerable is really great. And I would think with that might take some patience, because if people are uncomfortable with that piece of vulnerability, you might feel alone there for a little bit, as people get more comfortable, but people will catch on, because I think people want to be, want to share. But anyway.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Well, our last question is tied to just sharing some next steps with you and what are the best follow-up resources. So I'm just going to share a couple things with you all. Actually, hold on one second, because okay, just one second. My thing wasn't quite ready to share like I thought it was. That's okay. All right, here we go. So if you are listening and you did not take part in our event, Defeating Your Barriers to Jesus, that's what this is a bonus session for. And we wanted to make the content of that event available to people down the road. So we are turning this into an online course, and you can access that at the address here. We're going to also put that in the description to the video, so you can click on that, learn more about what's in that course, and get access to the rest of the material if you were interested. But Chris, we also talked about the Joy Switch and how the Joy Switch is a really great foundational resource, this book that you wrote for helping people connect with Jesus. Can you talk a little more about how our helpers might be able to use this to help people?
Yeah, I wrote the Joy Switch really as a very accessible resource for people who might be fairly new in this journey, or they just are looking for practical resources to help us get relational, to familiarize relational reality and living, and to give people exercises and practice. So there's 19 practice exercises in this little book. It's a great intro resources. I find a lot of people like to do the exercises with others. I find a lot of helpers and counselors and therapists like to either assign the exercises for people to go, because it builds capacity, or even to provide opportunities and things that you can do to practice getting relational and being familiarized with this process. So really, it's a useful, helpful resource to just get some momentum going, build capacity, learn to be comfortable with being relational. So that's really what we're after right there, Christy.
Perfect. And I love that it's a quick and easy read. It's such a helpful, practical book. So you can find that on our website at thrivetoday.org/our-works. Or if you go to our website and just click on resources, it's the first drop down for the resource button. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us at info@thrivetoday.org, or you can just take a look at our website, thrivetoday.org. We have many different resources that could be a help to you in your process of helping others. So thank you so much for being with us. Chris, thank you for all your answers. Really helpful things that you shared today. It was great being able to learn from you and hear your answers to these questions.
Thank you, Christy. It's always fun to talk about these things. And yeah, we're in the midst of some really great people and colleagues who've also been really at this a long time. So it's fun to be able to share it.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you have enjoyed this, and thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you again in the future at another Thrive Today event. Bye-bye.